Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the studio for part 2 of our AI jelly roll video, Conversations with Conrad, where in part 1, I asked Conrad, my virtual assistant, if he would please give me some ideas for some jelly rolls that I had lying around that have been here for a goodly amount of time. So today we're going to follow along, opening up the jelly rolls, do some fabric sorting, and then we're going to test all of the idea that he had for what I chose from the ideas that he did. And from the parameters that I set, I asked him to create a weekend project. So step-by-step instructions, not necessarily a quilt pattern, but step-by-step instructions to finish this quilt in a weekend. So I created a weekend breakdown and I took all of the information that he provided into his weekend checklist. I made some little titles and I'm putting together a downloadable PDF for you, which will be linked in the description box. So if you want to make the same quilt, you can with your jelly rolls. But we're going to walk through all of the whole thing step by step. And I'm also going to test the math and see if he's forgotten anything and kind of do it exactly the way I would if I were going to design a quilt pattern in the testing phase. So I hope you're going to enjoy that. I had a lot of wonderful comments about the video, lots of questions, which I'm hoping we're going to answer some of those or at least respond to some of those comments in this video. And if you want to make a jelly roll courthouse steps with me, stick around. That's what we're going to do today. Well, thank you guys so much. I'm so glad that you decided to stick around so that we can make our jelly roll courthouse steps in a weekend project. So the first thing that I wanted to say is, again, I'm going to reiterate, I did not use AI to design the quilt. I asked AI for some ideas on what to do with the jelly rolls, and then I prompted him with questions, changing the parameters a little bit. How big of a quilt could I make with one jelly roll? I want to add 2 jelly rolls. I'd like to do a piano key border. I want to do borders of a certain size. So I know I gave you a few pictures, a few instructions, a few prompts, and really what I was trying to do was brainstorm an idea so that I could unwrap the jelly rolls and actually make something with them. So I did ask him to do some math to see if he could do that correctly. He did not do any pictures. He didn't do any drawings. There's no steps. He did do some math and some calculations, which I have in this worksheet. I took the worksheet straight out of his responses, and what I did is sort of format it a little bit better, and then I'm going to follow it as though he made the pattern and then see how close we can get. The idea here is not to design a pattern. The idea here is if you have a pattern, especially in this particular case, because the Courthouse Steps is in the public domain, it is an antique quilt pattern. Lots of people have used it. The design is the size, the instructions, the drawings, and how we do the borders and the backing and all of that. So this is a public domain block. I was very careful about that. But what I'm interested in specifically for beginner quilters or quilters who are lacking in the confidence to do so, one of the common questions that I get is, I have a pattern, it's a basic block, I just don't know how much fabric to buy. I don't know how many blocks I can make out of what I already purchased. What can I do with this jelly roll? If I have one jelly roll and I want to make a certain size, how many borders do I need to add? How much extra background fabric do I need to add to it in order to do that? So these are more basic questions, and I wouldn't necessarily call them design, because if you're telling the computer, I would like to add this size border, or I want the quilt to be this size and I have this much fabric, how much more do I need? These are just general purchasing questions. These aren't necessarily design questions, but it's some of the most common questions that I get. So especially if someone purchases a pattern, or even if they know how to make a 9-patch block and they've made one before, but they don't know if I want to make the exact same quilt again, but I want to make it to fit a twin size bed. What do I do? How much fabric do I need? What do I do? And these are questions I get all the time. If you can get some of these questions answered within a small error of margin, then it makes AI a helpful tool for you in your future. So that's sort of where I'm going. And the other reason that I have chosen to do AI, we might get into in the responses of the comments, but to add that to the video, because simply fear. I have a lecture that I did recently that focused on using the internet and navigating the internet and all the information that we find on TikTok and YouTube, and who's a great instructor and whose instructions are maybe not so helpful when you're a new customer trying to figure out, or when you're a new quilter trying to figure out what's useful information and what isn't. So in doing those lectures, what I found is there's a tremendous amount of fear associated with utilizing AI in your everyday life. And I use it in my everyday life all the time. I use it in my quilting business to do business related tasks like analyzing video content and researching topics on website problems. So I use it for a lot of very practical things. And in my personal life, all the time, organizing, cooking, all kinds of different ways that I use AI. And so I think just having an opportunity to quell the fear of using it is very useful. So there may be people who disagree with that, and there may be people who agree. But what I'm finding overwhelming is that a lot of you know it exists, but you fear using it, and you're not sure how helpful it is beyond a regular Google search. And they really don't compare. So that's what the videos are designed to do. But enough about that. Let's get to the quilt. So let's unroll these jelly rolls and see what we have. So the biggest comment that I got was, am I making a follow-up quilt? And what do the jelly rolls look like? Why didn't you unroll the jelly rolls? And I'm so sorry I did that in my other video, but we've unrolled them here. And like I said, we have 2 sets of jelly rolls. So you're going to see some copies of prints here. Each jelly roll set had 42 strips. So I now have 84 strips. The fabric itself is French General. It is Atelier de France. I have already sorted it somewhat into color. So here are some of the base prints of the French General set. They have some good blenders. There's florals, darker reds, lighter reds, some geometric type prints. A nice little smattering of choices. We have some of the similar prints in our pink. These are our sort of darker pink fabrics. We also have our taupe pieces here. Some of our florals. I have to tell you, I'm going to show all the fabrics, but I started doing the video yesterday and realized today that I did not hook my mic up correctly. This is a new mic for me. So I have to go back. I'm going to move this over to the other pile. I had to go back and start again. So that's why these are already open. They're already somewhat sorted because I did that yesterday. So, and the idea here is that I'm going to sort the things that are very light from medium to dark. So here are our lightest prints. So pretty much all the same prints, just colored in a different way. And these are our lightest, even though they have a lot of floral in them, they are our lightest of the prints. In my weekend plan, and it is a long weekend now, so I started yesterday with a couple of little things. In my weekend plan, the first step that I have been given is to sort. And it says to get the fabric organized so that on the first day of sewing, everything is in loose piles. He recommends sorting by light, medium, and dark, which is right here on our prep sort sheet. Don't overthink it. You're just giving yourself a little visual control. So the first thing I want to point out is this jelly roll had 3 border prints in it. There they are, right there. And so for the border print, I will, because we're using strips like this, I find these are a little too busy or too distracting for the project that we're going to be working on. So, but I have decided to leave those for our piano key border that we're going to do. And then I also separated these guys right here, which are a little bit darker brown and olive. And this one I separated because it is more of a darker print. It's the only darker print that we have. It can fit in as a light if we need it, but I think it runs very, very dark. So I'm going to leave it over here in case we need an extra darker print, but I only have 2 strips, so I have to be careful about where I place it. So I put that over on the dark side. This one is a pile that's very medium, and actually if you take a picture with your phone, what you'll find is these show up very light, these show up very dark, these show up as mediums. Now I put my pinks with the dark because I kind of want the red pink to be the dark on this quilt, also for a very really good reason. So this is the darkest of my taupes that I have in this pile. I've dug through, and there are 2. This one's a little bit darker, and this one is the darkest. And if I lay those down on my dark, quote, dark strip sets, what I'm looking for is a lot of contrast. So if I lay it over here on this light strip, you can see I have a lot of contrast between the 2. So this could be, when set with this fabric, this could be a dark, okay? If it's over here with this fabric, assuming the contrast is really good, it could be a medium or it could be a dark. And so what I was showing on the video yesterday is how you go about laying the pieces together so you get the most contrast. So if I wanted a lot of contrast, since this is a floral, I would then put it with, say, this fabric right here. And then if you look at this fabric, you can see this is now a dark, this becomes a light. When you have a bunch of medium fabrics, those medium fabrics can be dark fabrics if they're with a very light fabric, or they can be light fabrics if they're with a very dark fabric. So you can see the difference. So this one over here is the dark, and over here it's the light. When I'm putting together my fabrics for my blocks and doing my strips, I want to make sure that I am putting things together in the rows that read the proper way, and I don't have any really dark sections. But this is going to be a scrappy quilt, so there are going to be parts of it that are going to look a little darker. In the light sections, they're going to look a little darker than the others. So I'm hoping to blend them in such a way that they work really well together. I mean, if you look at this pink right here, if I were to put these 2 together, which one's the dark, right? So I want to be super careful what I put it with. So if I'm going to use this pink, for example, as one of the darks, then I'm going to have to put it with something super light. When you're doing a scrappy quilt, keeping your mediums, paying attention to where your mediums fall on the scale is really very important. One of the next steps, so on my worksheet, my step 2 is to choose a center fabric. So this strip right here is a bit of an olive strip. It's kind of it's definitely medium, but it's kind of on the lighter side of medium. And it's very olive as far as taupe. You can see it here. It's a little greener than all of my taupe colors. And so because it was so very different and I only had the 2 strips, I decided to create that as my center square. So to make this quilt, I needed 20 of the center squares. So I went ahead and used the strips. I cut 20 of the squares, and I did it with both strips at the same time. So I wound up with 2 that are a pretty decent length to be added into my piano key border. So I'm just going to set those up here with my border prints that I have, because this is going to be part of the border, and I don't want to confuse that with all of the other fabrics that we're going to be working with. So the third tip that I needed to do to prep all the fabric was to carefully press all the jelly rolls, because as you can see, they have little bendovers in them, little foldovers. There's a distinct seam. Usually their ends right here are curled up, and we want those to be nice and flat, so when we cut our strips, we're ready to go. It says on here you definitely want to lightly press them and not stretch them, because they can get a little wavy if, actually he says wavy if handled like they owe you money, which I agree. Okay, so here's one of the things. Well, first off, I'm not sure that I showed a photo of what a courthouse steps actually looks like. So this is a base diagram of what we're going to be making here, this courthouse steps block. And I have colored it so that we can sort of match it to what I'm hoping we're going to do here with these fabrics. So what we need, and I've gone ahead and I've marked here so that I can reference myself what exactly I'm putting together. So with my pen here, we need a center square that's 2.5 inches, which I've marked as the olive. Those are the squares that I've already cut. And then I need two strips that, and he calls them strips in this case, two squares that are 2.5 inches. I'm going to do light. They're going to be the light squares on either side of the olive as shown in this diagram. Then I need two strips that are 2.5 by 6.5 for dark, two strips 2.5 by 6.5 light. So we go olive in the center, cream on the sides, dark on the top and bottom, light on the sides, now 2.5, 6.5. Then we go back to the top and the bottom, 10.5, 2.5, 10.5. Then we go back to light on the sides, 2.5, 10.5, and then the final are the 2.5 by 14.5, which are the dark. Now I've marked them light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. So over here where it says, you know, to keep it easier, cut and sew in batches by length. So for 20 blocks, this is actually exactly what we need for 20 blocks. So we need 20 center squares, which we have already cut. We need 40 light squares, which are going to go on either side of those. Now I've marked those light, but I'm going to show you some layout diagrams of what we could do and decide from there. But I've marked those light. Then it says you need 80 strips that are 2.5 by 6.5. Technically, we need 40 light and 40 dark. So that's not broken down. So I did that here, 40 light, 40 dark. 2.5 by 10.5 inch strips, we need 80. That'll be 40 light and 40 dark. And then our 14.5 inch lengths are going to be 40, and they'll all be dark. And his suggestion is to keep from spending a lot of time cutting. If you just cut enough to make your 5 blocks, you'll be good to go. And then you can sit down and sew for a little bit and then get back up. And that sort of forces you to get back up. It also reduces the amount of time you're using the rotary cutter. And you can take some breaks from that, which is good. I have some layouts. That's going to be our homework for Saturday morning. This is what it says we're doing on Saturday morning. So that's what we're going to do. And then we're going to get to the sewing. So I have some choices here. When we get to the 2.5 inch squares on either side of the center and the last strip on the bottom, there's where we may make some changes. I want to show you a couple of diagrams. So if I were to do the block exactly as I did in the diagram, I would wind up with a quilt that looks like this. And I've colored it obviously to the same so we can look at it. And it's very geometric. It's got some very distinct stripping in it because we've made all the same block. So if I just took that block and I repeated it multiple times, this is what we would get. Okay? Now, if I took that block, that same block as we just wrote, and I did one this way, and then I turned one at 90 degrees, and I continued on, I would get a quilt that looks like this. And that's an alternating block. So now you can see it's still a very geometric design, and but it alternates the position of the block, so it breaks up the color a little bit. And what we get are some very distinct sort of like borders around some of the blocks. This one reminds me more of sort of a basket weave type of look. Instead of doing that, if we were to split up that 40 2.5 inch squares and those 40 14.5 inch strips, we can then alternate light and dark. So from the center square, we can make half of the blocks. So 10 of the blocks would start with those squares in the center. So instead of cutting 42.5 inch light squares, we cut 20 of light and 20 of dark. So we have our olive in the middle. We would then put for half of the blocks the light as the two squares on either side and go from there. Dark, light, and we'd end with dark. For the other half of those squares, the other 10, we could start with the dark in the middle, and it would go dark, light, dark, light, dark, light on the top on the 14.5 inch. And then if we alternated those blocks, we would get a quilt that looks like this with alternated colorway, which might give you a little bit more breakup of those geometric lines. So we have to sort of figure out before we cut what look we're going to go for the finer quilt. So here are our options. Let me see here if I can get out of the way so you can see all the options. Here are all of our options for that specific quilt. And I need to make that decision. I kind of like the basket weave one. The one good thing about it is I can pre-cut everything, and I know exactly where to go. I can follow one block pattern. I don't have to get confused between the two. But the alternating is really nice too. It gives you an opportunity to really alternate the fabrics. And you can see that I've only made room for 20 blocks because that's what Conrad told us we're going to make. So, which will leave us, according to him, enough strips around the outside to make that piano key border. So I'm testing that to see if that actually works, just like I would a quilt pattern. So I have to decide now. I think I'm going to alternate them because I think it'll be really fun. And also I think it'll be a little bit easier to get all the pieces that I need out of the strips that I have. And I can blend the blocks really nicely. So if I cut the same number of things out of each of the strips, then I have stacks of strips I can start alternating and putting blocks together and make them look really nice. So I think that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to get started cutting now because that's the next thing that I need to do on my cutting list. Step 4 is to cut the center squares. And step 5 is to cut all the courthouse pieces. So now that I've decided on a quilt pattern, I'm going to cut those pieces out. And then I would like to, as I'm doing some of these tasks, address some of the comments we received on the first video. Hopefully we're making our way through the quilt. And if you aren't excited about hearing the responses to the comments, you can fast forward through all of this part because all I'm doing is cutting the pieces, and we're going to get to sewing here very shortly. All right. So I'm cutting, I need 40 squares of light, 40 squares of dark in order to do this center. I have gone through my fabrics. I've picked my 3 lightest prints, and I have a strip of each. While I'm doing that, I'll address, first off, thank you guys so much for how much interest we had in this video and all the comments, the lovely comments for people who I really made these videos for, which are people that are very interested to see how AI can help them in their general life. I got some wonderful comments. I got wonderful comments asking me, where do I get my own Conrad, or does Conrad have brothers and sisters? That the video was very informative. It's designed to be informative for a specific task. It's not designed for me to fully explain exactly how AI works. It doesn't address any major prompts. It doesn't take on a life of its own. It's just basic information, as I stated at the beginning. So it's just meant to be lighthearted. It's meant to really quell the fear of using AI, because I think that's one of the main problems, especially for the demographic that I deal with. That main issue is fear, and I don't really want anybody to be fearful. Like I said, I use my AI agents, and I have several. I use them all the time for different types of projects and business related things, mostly research, if I'm honest. And I also use it to analyze YouTube analytics, write letters. Sometimes I ask it to edit things for me. So if there's nobody around to do a basic edit, I ask it questions about the analytics on my newsletter. I ask it to, as I've showed you before, recolor photographs. So when I finish a design and I make a beautiful quilt, sometimes I ask it to recolor in specific colorways so that I don't have to make 10 or 12 quilts. It shows people who struggle with color, who want to see a completely different look. It shows them how to make that look. And I've also used it to make some really eye-catching arrangements or stylized photos for advertisements that I do and things like that. Brainstorming is a really big one. So sometimes I use it for getting ideas out of my head because as a creative professional, I have a ton of ideas in my head that sometimes take a little bit too long to get out of my head. So, for example, I had an idea the other day for a product and couldn't seem to figure out how I wanted the product to be relayed. And that can be really stalling to your brain. So I use AI to get over that. All right, so now that I've cut all 20 of my 14.5 inch strips. Here they are right here. We'll put those on my mat because I'm organizing everything, right? So I don't get them confused. So they're gonna go down here. These are the outside pieces. I want you to see, so this is my lighter centers. You see how all of these pieces right here are pretty light and then they get slightly darker when we get to the 10.5s, okay? So I'm kind of blending out. So now when I go to the 14s, I'm gonna use something that's a little bit darker, just a little bit. So you see how they're blending just a little bit. So I'm gonna do the same thing with my taupes that I did with these, but I was starting because I had a huge amount of creams and taupes. I had lots more fabric of that. I didn't have as much dark. So I really wanted to make sure that I cut my dark pieces out of the darkest prints that I had. These are slightly lighter or, you know, as we go. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my 10.5s out of these. I'm not going to have any trouble with my taupes. I'm going to have plenty of the taupe fabrics left to be able to cut all these 14s out. Then all the rest of these fabrics will get left for doing my piano key border. All right, so now that you've had that explanation, we can go back to cutting. I will finish up the cutting so I get all the parts together and then we can head over to the sewing machine next. All right, quilters, I have all of the red 10.5s cut. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut the rest of those 14.5s out of the taupe and then we'll be ready to assemble. All right, gang, I have finished everything. Here we go. When I get 14.5 inch strips, by the way, I can get 2 out of a jelly roll strip. So everything's cut, ready to sew. This is all that I have left over. These are all of the different strips that I have, which I think is going to make a great border. I'm really excited I chose to do that. Here's a few bits and bobs that are going to wind up in my, my scrap bin. I can probably do something with those later, but we'll just set those aside for now and concentrate on these strips. And I think it's time to move over to the sewing machine, don't you? Get to our next step. So let's read what our next step is. I have ignored Conrad completely, and I did not sew or cut enough for 5 blocks. I just went ahead and got it all done because I wanted to make sure that I had enough. And I'm really excited about the blending here. I'm gonna have a little less blending in the pinks and the reds, but I really love the blending in the creams. So that was our Saturday morning cutting, and it is past Saturday morning. So right here, step number 6 on my paper says to sew blocks in batches, sew blocks 5 at a time. And the reason he says to do that is so that you have time to get up, take a break and all of that, because by Saturday evening, he says, which is today, we should be ready to lay out the blocks, all 20 blocks. So this is the means to getting 20 blocks sewn. Can we get those sewn today? And then still make it to doing our layout for the evening. We're not going to sew our rows until Sunday morning, so Sunday morning rows. So let's see how we do today sewing these blocks. All right, gang, just for a break, this is a little intermediate segment I like to call Life Happens. So working on this project over a weekend, I'm doing all the testing. It's also a holiday weekend. We have a house full of guests. So now today is editing day. And as we enter in, this is a little disjointed video, but as we enter into editing day, I realized that I filmed every second of putting and sewing this quilt together piece by piece to make the block. However, great sound because I have a new mic. However, I didn't change the camera. So what the video is actually looking at is a pile of scraps on the table. So we're going to intermediate in here, and I'm just going to walk you through the assembly of both blocks because I'm doing two different blocks. I call it the light and the dark. So, and you'll see that in the little weekend plan that is for free at a link. So let's walk through the dark block, and then I'll show you the light block, and it'll be a little surprise as we get through this video. All right, so let's pretend we're sitting at the sewing machine now. We have everything laid out on our board. We have 20 center squares. We're going to divide our 20 center squares. If you're following me and you are also making a block and a dark block, this would be the dark block, you would divide your center squares. If you're going to make all your blocks the same, then you'll just have 20 center squares. I'm not doing that. I'm going to alternate the blocks. So I'm going to divide my 20 center squares into piles of 10. The first 10 squares, I will set 10 of them aside. So the first 10 squares, I'm going to sew all of the right side 2.5 inch light square because we're going to start with light when we're making our dark block. So we're going to start with light. We're going to sew one to one side. I'm chain piecing all of those. When I'm done, I'm going to press those out. And then I'm going to sew all of the left side and get all those done. And then I'm going to press those out. And I will now have a unit right here in the center that is 2.5 by 6.5 inches. Now I'm going to take my 6.5 inch strips of dark, and I'm going to put one at the top and one at the bottom. So I chain pieced all the tops, then went back and chain pieced all the bottoms. So now I will have a finished square that is 6.5 inches square. You can check these. If now is a really good time to check your math to make sure that your 1/4 inch seam is correct. If when you go to sew these on, your center is longer than it should be, then your 1/4 inch seam is too scant. If when you go to sew them on, the strip is longer, this center is shorter than the strip, then your 1/4 inch seam is too wide. So now is a great time to adjust your 1/4 inch seam, and you can also trim all your blocks down to 6.5 inches square. Now we're going to start with the next section. So we go back to the sides and we put our 6.5 inch strips of light on either side of our section. And then once those are done, and again, I strip pieced all of one side, cut them, pressed them out, then strip pieced all of the other side, cut them, pressed them out. And then I'm going to add my 10.5 inch dark strips to the top and the bottom. And that finishes the block at 10.5 inches, right? So same thing, I'm going to test my math, check my 1/4 inch seam. If your 1/4 inch seam should now be adjusted, everything should be fine. And if you want, you can trim them to size if there's a problem with the size. Otherwise, move on to the next step. So the last steps in the block is to add the 10.5 inch strips of light to either side, and then the 14.5 strips of dark to the top and the bottom. So again, I'm going to sew all of the 10.5 strips to one side, strip pieced. Then I'm going to cut, press the seams out, do the same thing to the other side, press the seams out. Then I'm going to sew all the tops, press the seams out, sew all the bottoms, press the seams out. And that gives me my dark Courthouse Steps 14.5 inch square. Let's look at the light version. So now I have folded the quilt in such a way we can look at the light block. So the light block starts the same. You take our second set of 10 inch squares, our second 10 2.5 inch square centers here. And we're going to sew our dark squares to either side of our center square. So we do all of one side, strip pieced, chain pieced, and press out. Same thing with the other side, press out. We have a unit now that's 2.5 by 6.5. Now we're going to take our 6.5 inch light strips and we're going to put one at the top and one at the bottom. Okay. Then our block right now is 6.5 inches. We're going to make sure that's the right size. Same applies. Then we're going to move on to the next piece. So now we're adding the sides. So for the light block, we're adding dark. So we're adding 6.5 inch darks to either side. Then we're adding 10.5 inch lights to the top and the bottom. Then our finish square, or our block is 10.5 inches square. For the final piece, 10.5 inch strips of dark to the sides, 14.5 inch strips of light at the top and the bottom. So that finishes out our light block. And as I go, I'm chain piecing and I'm pressing the seams out and pressing the seams out. And the good news is that you don't ever have to meet any of these seams until you go to assemble the blocks together. So I hope that makes sense. I'm so sorry you didn't get to see me sewing, but let's face it, the sewing was boring. I had to reset the sewing machine a few times, and you're really just watching me reset my 1/4 inch seam and chain piecing, and there's not a whole lot exciting about it, but you will notice how I sort of blended those fabrics out just a little bit, so light pinks to dark and all of that. So that was what I was trying to achieve with all of my light, medium, and dark sorting at the beginning. And as I go, I can mix and match the strips together by looking at the pile next to me and not putting any of 2 colors together or 2 patterns together if at all possible. All right, it is now Sunday, and yesterday I finished putting all of the sections on all of the blocks. I also took the time after I was finished to make sure that they were all squared up properly, so they were all 14.5 inches, so we didn't have any issues. A couple of 1/8 inch trims, and we're all good. So I'm super excited to put them together today. So let's take a look at the blocks that we currently have. We have 2 sets. I've got a couple here, right here. So this one right here is exactly the original block drawing that we put together. I'm going to go ahead and put that on the screen as well. So we did a original colored drawing starting with our center square and our 2 light colored squares on either side, which meant that the dark was on top, the light on sides, dark top, light sides, and dark top, and that finished out the block. Remember, I decided to make alternate blocks, so instead of making 20 that were this size, I decided to make 10 that's this colorway and another 10 that are slightly different. So that's the one that we have above here. So you can see I started with my darker color on either side of my center square, and then light on the top and bottom, dark on the sides, light on top and bottom, so on and so forth. So the 2 blocks, which are very scrappy, I did attempt to try to blend from lighter in the middle out to darker on both the lights and the darks. So I hope you can see, but it's very, very scrappy. And so these are the 2 original, this is the original block, that's the change that I made. So I now have 20 blocks, 10 of each. And if you look at the original sketch that I decided to do, the layout with the 2 alternating blocks, we're going to start in the upper left corner, just like reading a book, with this block and alternating with this block. And just like that drawing, I had to alternate not only the type of block or the colorway, but also the direction that it was in. So let's take a look, as I've laid a few of them out already over here. So I lay the original one, I'll call the dark block. I laid that one just like the drawing, so it looks just like this guy right here. And then I've taken my alternating block, put it next to it, but turned it 90 degrees so that its big light colored part on the top and the bottom were going to the side, if that makes sense. And so in the geometric shaping of the quilt, what you'll see, you sort of see a ball of color here and a ball of color here. And that's sort of the way I'm trying to get it to come out in the sketch. So you can see that I have a 2x3 layout here, and there's no way our whole 4x5 is going to fit on this this design wall, but we're going to try to put at least some of the blocks up so you can see it. So in order to continue the pattern, I will remove this one. We'll move this other one up top, and let me get some pins. So we'll move this guy up to its resting spot, And then you'll see we have red top and bottom, taupe to side, red top and bottom. So we need another taupe to side. And then all I've done is I've tried to make sure that when I lay these out, that I'm not laying the exact fabric next to another exact fabric. So I think we're good with this one being up here on the top. And obviously it's not going to fully fit, but you get the idea. So we'll continue on with that by sectioning it out. So my second row, I start with taupe because the first row I started with the big red stripe block. Now I start with the big taupe block, go back to red, and I'm always putting them in the same direction. I'm just alternating where they are on the row. So that would mean that, not this guy. I've got two block piles here. I'm getting them confused. And that's really what doing the layout is all about, is making sure that you're laying them in direct order. So when you pick them up, you sew them together, they're in the right order, right? And then the last one in this row will be my big red. So we'll basically call them block 1, block 2, block 1, block 2. So in the second row, it's 2, 1, 2, 1, and so on and so forth. So if I started row 2 with block 2, then I would start row 3 with block 1, and I'll keep going. And there we go. So there's the start of it. There's my first three rows in my 4 by 5 row setting. So 3 rows in, I've got enough blocks to continue. So if I were just to sew these blocks together and be done, which you could do, my quilt size right now would be 56 by 70. And I want to show you what I have left over from the 2 jelly rolls that I have. Let's move my blocks off to the side and look at all this pile. It's probably hard to see the height of it, but there is quite a lot of fabric left. I also have my little pieces of dark that I had before, and those 6 strips of border print. So there's 8 full strips right there that aren't even used in the quilt. And then I have all these partial strips left that I have not used. So tons and tons of fabric. So now you can see why I thought I can use up the rest of it in a really lovely piano key border around the outside. And I think I have settled based on a few things. I had cut a couple of extra, which I knew of those 10.5-inch strips, and I didn't quite need them. So I think if I cut every single strip for the piano key at 5 inches, it will finish as a 4.5-inch border. And I think that'll be great. And then also remember, in our diagram, I stated that I wanted a nice thin border around the outside of this quilt top. I wanted to do a 1.5-inch border to frame the blocks themselves. Then I want to put the piano key in. Then I want a 1.5-inch border around that. And that way you have a nice frame that goes around the center portion of the quilt, which admittedly has a pattern, but is very scrappy. And then you frame it. Then you can do another patterned type border, which is just going to be a lot of piano key strips around the outside. So we have to give our eye a place to rest, something to frame it. And I want that frame to be nice and strong. So I have picked a couple of fabrics I want you to see so that we can see which one I think would look ultimately best around the quilt. Let's take a look at those. All right, I have chosen, just out of my stash, I found a nice taupe that's just some polka dots, and the polka dots are just a lighter taupe, so it's not quite as, in your face polka dot. And then I found this little textured print that looks, it's very tweedish actually, but it looks just little diagonal striping on the fabric, and that one's a little bit darker, a little towards the brown. So let's figure out how they look with all the fabrics. Let me show you. I'm leaning towards one over the other, but if you look at, let's say, the pinks, this one's definitely some of the taupe, like right in here that you see in the leaf and all of that. It surprised me how green my center squares look against this taupe. Let's move this so you can actually see. If you look at the center squares, they look very olive against this taupe. And obviously my creams look pretty good against that one. Here's a couple of the olive or the taupey prints. Let's move this so you can see those taupey prints on that fabric. And that one's okay. It would make a frame. I think the frame would be a little too light for my taste. So if we look at that same set of strips with this print, what I see is a much darker, stronger line. I don't want to go super dark. I don't want to go into the deep browns, but I did want to give a lot of contrast to some of these fabrics so that it would make a nice frame. So let's take a look at it on the design wall. So here are my two prints. So here is my taupey print. And you can see, you know, it looks fine from the camera angle against this fabric if I were just to put a little tiny piece. And just so you know what I'm saying, just going to lay this up under here. We're talking about a piece that's about like that. So you can see that if I used this fabric to frame the quilt just based on that little 1.5 inches that's poking out right there, it doesn't really frame it in the way that it's not quite a strong enough fabric. It blends really nicely, but it's not quite strong enough. So if I take my little brownish taupe and I do the same thing, what I'm looking for is a little stronger line. There we go. So do you see that? It's a little darker. It's not a huge amount darker, but it is slightly darker than that other taupe, and maybe would look a little nicer, a little more framed. Now I could go with a darker brown. Let's take a look at that. Let me go grab a darker brown and see if we like that one and see what happens there. Okay, I went and I pulled some darker fabrics just to see what they'd look like against this. I have one in particular that is a slightly darker brown than this. Let's see here. This is the original fabric I pulled. Here's another one that's a little bit darker. And actually, let's do our overhead cam a little bit because it has actually a creamy taupe sort of set of dots in it. And this is what it looks like. It gives a much stronger line, definitely a much stronger line, a little bit of pattern. Now these came directly from my stash, so I didn't cut into anything. I'm looking for that little green piece again. But there you go. It's a little bit more. Here we go. Here's our center square. And it pulls in that little bit of green. Ooh, we're getting a big thunderstorm, so hopefully. And then I pull, hopefully we won't lose any power. I also pulled these. These are really brown. This one's more of a chocolate, like a milk chocolate, and this one's more of like a deep olive brown. Both have a cream. This one has a creamy type look to it, not like the taupe. So you can see the very distinct difference between those browns, all three. This one's very red, and mixed with the red takes a turn a little different. So let me look at what they look like on the quilt. I am very concerned about our thunderstorm. All right, here we go. On that same block, so that one has a very strong line. And I think if the idea here is to frame it, it's going to pull out all those dark lines that are outlining in that fabric, like this one right here, this one right here. So I think that one really does frame this quilt a lot better. Let me show you the other two so you can see the difference. I think that one's a little too dark. I think it's it almost reads black on the camera. It's not, but it's super dark. And I think it's a little overpowering. And this one, I believe, is going to read a little too chocolate. So again, that one reads very black on the camera, and I just don't think we need that strong of a line. I want a strong line, just not quite that strong. So I think now that I've gone back to the drawing board a little bit, I had made up my mind, but now not so much. I think that one is our best candidate with this green on here. I just think it blends really nicely. Let me show you. Here it is with the darker brown. They're pretty similar. Interestingly enough, this is the brown. Let's look at these because this is what's in the striping of the border prints. This is almost an identical brown. So that outlining is pretty close. And it's lighter than that. It's really green. It's really got a green tone to it. So I think I'm happy with this print going with it. I think this print makes a little bit more sense. So I'll be finishing the quilt top first. Then I will be adding this guy right here. So I need 7 strips for the inner border. And then I will add the piano key border to the outside. Once I get that done, I'll be able to measure for the inner border. And then I have to decide on the piano keys. So I have some choices. I can take a corner square. It could be this green, this dark brown green, or something else. And I can put strips together for the corners. I can make a strong top and bottom border piano key and then have the others run up along the side all the way to the edge, which means I would have some strips going this way and some going that way, and they would cross each other. I could be super fancy and make something different for the corners. So those corner squares on my border print could be made of, I don't know, half square triangles or points or pokey points or whatever. I could do something fun in there. And that way my piano key border could run on the sides and the top without crossing one another. And when we get to that point, I'll show you what I'm talking about. But I'll make that decision in a little bit. But first I'm going to put the quilt top together, and then I'm going to add the first 1.5 inch border. I think that's my most wise decision. So I'll come back when the quilt top is together, now that we've picked our framing border number 1, and we'll talk about that piano key. Okay, so I'm back now, and I have the whole quilt top, the center of it complete. I have my 1.5 inch border frame. I love the frame. I think it's doing exactly what it needs to do. And now we're going to get to what I called the piano key border. And it occurred to me that you may not exactly know what I'm talking about, depending on who you are watching. So I thought I would get out a couple of samples of how I've used piano key borders in the past. And I've got them here on the table. So I'm going to show you close-ups, but I'll go ahead and put pictures of the design on the top. So the first one I want to show you is a book that came out some time ago called The Civil War Sampler Block of the Month. That was by me. And the cover quilt of the Civil War Sampler is a lovely sampler with a log cabin center, and then all of the leftover fabrics that I used around the outside of that quilt, I put into strip sets and made a piano key border. So let's take an up close look at that border and see exactly what it looks like. Okay, so here is that quilt border, and you can see I have used a Civil War print with some motion in it. My sampler blocks are here. And we're looking at the corner right now. So I have a sort of a zigzag or a wavy print as my framing border for this quilt. Here's the side of it in front. So this is my framing border for this particular quilt. You'll notice I have a cornerstone. That's what I was just speaking about a few minutes ago. I put a cornerstone here, and mostly because when the two borders came together, I would have had to miter here and match it just so. And since I wasn't very particular about how I cut it, I didn't want to worry about that. So I went ahead and I used a square of fabric in the quilt and put a cornerstone there. So then the outer border, again, same print, just a little bit bigger, cornerstone again, so that I don't have to meet those points. And then we have our border in the middle. And this is what I did with all of that leftover fabric. Now it appears as though, as we're looking at it, that these are all probably 2.5-inch strips or jelly rolls as it may be, because they all look pretty even. But I assure you that's not always the case. So what I usually do, as I'm building the sampler, I'm cutting strip sets out, and those strip sets will be cross-cut into the parts that I need to build each of the individual blocks. So when I'm done building those individual blocks, I'm going to have some form of partial strip set left over. And that is exactly the same as I have now, only these are jelly rolls. So I'm going to cut those jelly rolls apart. But if, in fact, during the making of these blocks, I had 2.5-inch strips, 1.5-inch strips, 2-inch strips, it really doesn't matter. I can add them together and put them all into that piano key border. So it resembles the keys of a piano. And they can be all different widths. They do not have to be the same width. So looking back at the border, you could see I just alternated all different types of fabrics in order to finish the print. And then when I get to the edge of the quilt and I'm ready to add these cornerstones to get to the border, I can just cut the strip the size that I need. If I need to trim anything off the sides, I try to do it from both ends so that I don't have a really skinny sliver on one side and a thick piece on the other, and even that border print out, and it works out really well. Now the next quilt sample I want to show you is my pickle dish quilt. And this one I did the same piano key border with all of the leftover fabrics, but this time I had intermittent widths in this particular grouping, which makes for something a little more visually interesting. And in this case, the quilt that I made in the pickle dish is a foundation pieced quilt. So I pre-cut a lot of the parts that I would then put into the quilt, and that required some trimming. So we oversized some of those pieces, and I again had some strip sets left over. Also, I had some extra yardage, just little strips this wide, that wide, whatever, so that I could cut my parts out. And all those little leftover bits and bobs went into this border. So here is the pickle dish border. And again, I chose to do that cornerstone out of one of the available fabrics that I had. I had enough fabric left that I could get this nice square. I'm not going to have that ability with my jelly rolls unless I use this border print that I have here as my cornerstone. I'm going to have to make a decision. So I either have to use that or use another fabric that'll fit into that spot, which I may or may find, may or may not. Or I have to create some sort of angled piece, or I have to run one of the borders this direction until it stops on the quilt top, and then run the other one all the way up to the end, which means I'll have some strips here that are going in opposite directions. And I hadn't quite decided what I wanted to do yet, but I did want to show you this border because this border has all different widths of fabrics in that piano key border. So I have some narrow ones and some wider ones, and it still looks pretty lovely. And so this is once the quilt is framed and you can really see it, again, here's that nice little skinny border that I added in here so that I can break up the body of the quilt with the border. And then I chose not to even do an outside border. I just put the binding on it because I thought that was really cute and I wanted to have all those extra colors around the outside. And then I want to show you another little border that I have added that's piano key because I did it in a slightly different way. All right, the last quilt that I want to show you with the piano key border I call Plumes on Parade. And this is a quilt that is inside my Borderline Scrappy book that comes out in June. And I'll show you this particular piano key border is part of a border quilt. So here are some different layers in the border print quilt. And as you can see, I have a border print at the top, and then I have a pieced block and another border print. And I also have 3 piano key rows. And this one is made completely from scraps that I auditioned with the border. So this is a specialty border because as I was making the blocks, I wanted to make sure that a lot of these read as solids because I wanted the graphics of the pattern to really show. I wanted it to be clear that this was a scrappy, uneven log cabin. and that the other parts within there were scrappy border prints. And I didn't want the colors, I wanted the colors to blend really beautifully so you could tell the difference between the darks and the lights. And I used all of my value to create the graphics in this block. But I had a lot of scraps that I could match with this border, or in the case I say match, I say coordinate. But I coordinated a lot of different scraps in this border. And here's the other end of the quilt. So you can see lots and lots of color that will coordinate with the plumes on parade, and all different widths and sections and different types of fabrics in this particular border. So I use this as a horizontal border going across the quilt, and all types of different widths. So this is what we would call our piano key border. And this is one of my favorite ways to take all of the leftover fabrics from a quilt and add them to the border. And it doesn't have to be, if you don't have a lot of scraps, you can make portions of the border this way and leave the rest open. It's just a fun way to use up those fabrics. So if you don't have room on the front of the quilt to use them, it's an excellent way to use them on the back of the quilt, and it adds a little visual interest to the back. And it also keeps you from having what I like to call the pile of regret. So we have created a quilt from 2 jelly rolls, and we have quite a stack of those jelly rolls left. So I could take those individual jelly rolls and take the brown ones and the taupe ones and put that in my brown scrap bin, and the pink ones in the pink, and the reds in the red. But they are toned in such a way they all go together. And since there's quite a large block of them, it seems like a real regret on my part to not use them in the quilt. So that's why I'm going to put them in the piano key, which adds a little bit more motion, another little depth of flavor to this quilt, and it uses up what we have. So let's get started putting our pieces together to go into this border. All right, so let's gather what we have. Here's my pile, the little bits that we have from our center squares. We're definitely going to use these because it makes that center square pop out. So these are full width of fabric strips, and my advice, as I always like to do, is to take these width of fabric strips and put them in a pile. If you have any others that are left over that are full widths of fabric, put those with it. Here you go. And so I may wind up with quite a large pile that are full width of fabric strips. And this is really good because when you have those full width of strips, you can add them into strip sets like so. You can just keep sewing them into interesting little strip sets and then cut your sections out, and it's less sewing because obviously you're taking these and going all the way from one end to the other. So you can mix and match them, and then when you go to cut those sections apart, you'll have some nice lengths of however long your strip set is that are that tall. You can cut them into sections, and then you can arrange those sections in between all of the other pieces that you have that may be shorter. So this little section here that we have is a little bit shorter. For a 5-inch border, if I cut them at 5, I'm going to get probably only 2 little sections of strips out of this one. So you can take your shorter ones and add your shorter ones together and make another set of strips. Okay, so something like so. So you can create a section here. You can add this to another part, but the more like sizes you have to create strip sets, the better you're going to be because it's less sewing. Other tips: don't make your strip sets super long. If you sew them edge to edge, long ways, like so, I would take 2 or 3 fabrics, sew them together, press them, and cut them into sections. And that way, you can manipulate the fabric a little better. So what I mean by that is if you take 3 or 4 strips, you make a strip set out of it, you cut those 3 or 4 strips into sections, you can take those and place the smaller ones in between the other smaller groups, and you can mix and match your fabrics a little bit. Try to mix and match your colors a little in your strip sets. So don't put 3 creams together. Don't put 3 reds together. Split them up. And you can always turn you know, if you've got one color next to one another, you can turn it and do something else. So we're just doing exactly what we did with the quilt. We're just making it nice and scrappy, and we're creating smaller strip sets to go together. And then you're going to stitch those end to end to end until you get the desired size in order to make the length and the width so that you can make your border prints. If you do them in divisible numbers, you know, so you have 2.5-inch strips. So when you stitch them together, each little strip section is going to be 2 inches. So it's very easy to count with jelly rolls, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and you can get to the length that you need in order to make your strip set. And then that's it. You just have a good time making them and then create your border to the length you need your border to be. I know everybody's a pretty good fan, if you're a new quilter, of just stitching a border on and then pressing it out and cutting the sides. And that's a decent way to do it when you're just starting out. But if you're feeling that your borders are getting any ripples or they're getting a little bit wavy, I have a video in the beginner series strictly on adding your borders, which gives you really good ideas on how to measure 3 times through your quilt. So you can add your borders on, and that will prevent rippling, and it fixes a multitude of things. So if you need to understand how to get your borders on, definitely check out that video. All right, I'm going to put this piano key border together, and then I'm going to make that decision on what I'm going to do when the 2 borders meet, and I'll come back and tell you what that decision was. And I'm also going to make a decision because this quilt is starting to get a little bit monsterish. It's now 72 by, or 58 by 72. It doesn't fit very well on this design wall behind me, so it's getting nice and big. It's a really good length to be a throw, which is what I originally intended. And if I keep adding borders, I'm going to make it bigger and bigger, and then I'm going to have to find a bed to put it on. So I'm going to see measurement wise if I need to kind of slow down and maybe not make it quite so big. But I am going to put the piano key on it. So whether I add that extra frame to the outside or I just use the binding to frame it, I haven't really quite decided yet. So let me get started on making my piano keys, and then we'll start seeing what turns out when we get to the end of the video. Oh, look what I've got. A whole bunch of strip sets. Let's take a look at them. All right. So I just took a bunch of strips, put them together. You can see they are put together by like sizes. So for example, here is 3 together. That is width of fabric. So now what we're going to do is take, most of them are 4. Occasionally there's a 5 print and then maybe occasionally a 3, but most of them are 4 strips. So now I can take my ruler and we're going to cut them at 5 inches and literally just going to get them as far over as I can to get a nice good strip. I will wind up with a bunch of rectangles that look just like this. Okay? Which I'm going to stitch end to end to end to make our border. And that's exactly how I'm going to do it. And I've done it in such a way that I believe some of these shorter strips that I've put together, yep, just like that, I can get 2. So then when I go to put them end to end to end, so if I did this, you would see that they were repeats. But if I need to, I can mix them in and turn them around and lay them end to end, and I will get something that is much more broken up and not repeatable. And then I'll just continue on using my ruler and rotary cutter and just cutting my little 5-inch strips. One little thing to note, as you're cutting, strip sets can get a little bit wonky. I've noticed this one is starting to come in just a bit. So just every now and then, you're going to want to check your width of your strip. So as I lay this one down, I'm laying a line across my seam line here, just so I can straighten up and square up this strip set. And when I turn it around like so and lay this on my 5-inch line, I'm taking off a tiny little sliver, which is a little tiny bit uneven. You can see it's a little wider here than it is down there. So I do that just to make sure that my pieces are square. And I don't do it every every cut, but I do it maybe every third or fourth cut just to make sure that my strip sets are square, because like I said, they can get a little bit wonky, especially when you're pressing and stitching them together. So, and I pressed mine pretty good, so just keep that in mind when you're cutting, that you may need to square up a little bit. Okay, so now let's talk about that piano key border and that corner square issue that I've been talking about. So let's pretend this is the side border of my piano key, and then I'm going to have another border running the top and the bottom. They're not connected yet. So you can see that's naturally how they want to stop, right there, and there's a little space there for something to make them meet. So I could run that border top and bottom, and then I can take the side border and bring it all the way up, which is how we'd normally do a border, but then I have seams that don't meet or kind of look weird there. So I leave the space for the cornerstone, and I could take my little skinny border print, and I could make a square and make a cornerstone there. But I kind of want something to turn the corner of that strip set. So if I want to do that in an easy way, I could do a foundation piece thing, but let's say I want to do something super easy. So if I take a square and I cut it in half, have a triangle, and then I'll take one of my leftover border print pieces, and I'm just going to lay it down where the point of the triangle meets center in the seam. Very simple. No math or specialty thing. And I'm just going to stitch it along the bottom of that triangle. Then I'm going to wind up with a piece that looks like this, and it's going to have, I'll fold up the triangle, and then I can take my ruler and I can square it to the size that fits right there. Okay, just very simple, because I have a square edge. So here's one that's already been trimmed, and then I have the border print coming in at an angle, and it kind of turns that corner. And I don't have to do anything special or have any special kind of cut, but it makes that corner change. And I kind of like that a little better than, say, just a half square triangle or just a square. I like having it turn at the angle there so that, it makes a little bit more sense and it's not difficult to do. All right, one thing to note. So here is right here at the corners, you can see I've left a little bit of space. They don't go all the way to the corner. And I just wanted to show you that because I cut myself some 5-inch squares, knowing full well that they might not be exactly sized. And I like the idea that I can trim it right now to the 5 inches that I need. And I'm going to have that little tiny bit of overhang. So as I sew it, it may wind up in the corner, or it may wind up with a little piece of fabric right there at the corner, which is okay because maybe we're turning the border. So if it doesn't meet, it's fine. So what I did is I went ahead and I trimmed from the point of the triangle to my 5-inch mark, and then I can go back and trim off the dog ears, which hopefully would go a little better than what it's going right now. But that's all you do is you lay it down on the 5-inch mark, and then you can go right back and trim it. And now you have your 5-inch square, and you can see on the top of that square where the pink is, I have like a 1/4 inch seam allowance at the top. So I cut my 5-inch square, cut it in half, and then added my border print to it. And it should fit. Once you get it done, you're just going to trim it to the size that you need. You'll have some leftovers, but it'll be fine. And you can see sort of how the corners will meet if I show you that little piece at the bottom, the top and bottom strip. You can see how the quilt will actually make a curve around that outside border. All right, so we have come to the end of our challenge. Right at the end of my Sunday afternoon prep, where it says to give the quilt a final press, trim the threads. Let's face it, I haven't trimmed the threads yet. I tend to trim them right at the top of the quilt, and then when I'm quilting it, I go along and I trim the threads. Trim loose threads, trim dark threads, and prepare the backing. Piece your backing, and also to remember that the backing should be at least 4 inches larger than the quilt top on all sides, or whatever the long armor prefers. So that is the final instruction that we have. So in the final instruction, pick your binding, go ahead and make your binding, set it aside. Conrad says take the whole thing, put it in a bag or a project box with the batting, the backing, the binding, all of it, so that when you're ready to quilt it or give it over to the quilter, you have everything that you need. I've put the finished quilt on here, all right? That center top that we made was 56 inches by 70 inches. Remember, I used two 42 strip jelly rolls. Our center top finished at 56 by 70. And then we added, as I said I was going to, it's easier to see it over here. Obviously, this quilt got to be a monster, and I've tucked the rest of it over here on the corner. But if we look at this corner over here, we can fully see the borders. So I have my 1.5 inch strip border that frames that center set of blocks in the quilt. Here is the piano key border around the outside. There are my cool little corners that I created to make that rounded edge. And then, so we kind of have a cornerstone, but it's like half of a cornerstone. And then I added the 1.5 inch border to the top. So those three borders have added 14 inches to both the top and the bottom. So our finished quilt is 70 by 84. It's a monster, a monster. And then I have on the table here, I actually have, along with my coffee, is all the leftovers that we have from these jelly rolls, because I want you to see what we actually had left over. So let's take a look at that. All right, so here are my piles of little bits and bobs. So definitely if you're into bit and bob piecing, here's some leftover little border strips, which normally would wind up, at least something like this, would wind up in my strip bins. Those are our bits and bobs left over. We also have piano key pieces left over, and I think there's like one strip and another one of these over by the sewing machine. But I have quite a few of these. And I think it would be fun taking these a little later on for another day, and we can turn these into a small project. I have an idea of what I want to do with that, but that's again for another day. But that's a pretty decent stack of other little bits and bobs that we can use. So you could make some crazy quilt things out of this, or some small bag projects out of this. You can use these for small bag projects. So there's lots of things you can do with all these leftovers. I have some plans for some upcoming things. You'll probably see this again. But as far as this goes, we're going to end our AI portion, but let's have a little bit of recap, shall we? So on the first part one of the video, I said, AI designed my quilt? ? Exclamation point. So for those of you that have seen the journey now, did AI design the quilt, or did I design the quilt? It's a very good question. So remember, we prompted AI to come up with some brainstorming ideas for my jelly roll. Then after he came up with some ideas, I prompted him again and said, rather than adding background fabrics and border fabrics and all of that, I have 2 jelly rolls and I want to make everything out of those jelly rolls. And I asked him to rethink. He came up with 3 ideas. Of those ideas, I picked a Courthouse Steps because I kind of honed in on the design itself. Knowing quilting the way that I do, I decided Courthouse Steps sounded like a fun thing to do. So I'm the one that chose that option from the brainstorm. I'm also the one that chose the borders, the size of the borders. Conrad didn't choose that. He didn't choose the piano key border. I talked to him about it and I put it in my prompt, but I chose that myself. So I came up with the ideas for the 2 framing borders. I came up with the piano key. I came up with the size for the piano key. I did ask him to create a working project, some sort of a checklist, so that we could take the project that I intended to do and break it down into steps so that I could finish it in a weekend. That part is probably my favorite part of what Conrad does for me, along with brainstorming. So in the brainstorming, if you were looking for a pattern that was existing from a pattern designer, you could put that in your prompt. I would like to find a pattern from an existing pattern designer. You could ask for the top 10 best-selling patterns for jelly rolls. And then once he came up with those patterns, you could go to that website and purchase that pattern if you don't want to come up with your own idea. I'm a designer, so sometimes I just need prompting. I just need brainstorming. So is he designing it or am I designing it? I would argue with you that I designed it. I think he helped me come up with the idea. Would I have come up with that idea on my own? Absolutely. I know enough about the study of quilting to know what a courthouse steps is, what a log cabin is, all those things. So I don't necessarily need him, but having him to bounce ideas off of and have a conversation with, which is why we call the series Conversations with Conrad, that is invaluable to me. I work a lot on my own, so it's nice to hash out ideas. I would always test math. If you ask Conrad or your AI agent a math question, you always have to have human interaction. This is not a business where you can just trust that a computer is going to do it. You have to interact with the process. But I think brainstorming is a great idea. And I also think breaking things into steps is really spectacular. I love working that way. I try to encourage my students to work that way. You'll see that type of formation done in almost every single one of my videos, breaking it into steps, breaking those steps down. So having him put together a good program and a list that you can follow that keeps you on track, that is an excellent way to use AI. Maybe you could get him, once the finished size is done, to calculate your backing. If you lack the ability to do that, he can definitely tell you that, whether to purchase, how many yards to purchase of traditional fabric at 45 inches and 108 wide backing. He might be able to tell you what the best size for your batting is, especially if you prompt him with the recommendations of yourself or your long armor. That's a great way to use him. So there's lots of different ways to use AI besides designing or stealing someone's art. Think about exactly what you're doing with the tool, because AI is exactly that. It's a tool. And I hope you'll take the time to go and check out the podcast that I mentioned. Also, there will be a link to our project. If you love this quilt and you want to see this quilt being made, I will definitely put the project, weekend project format checklist on a download folder for you to get it. So you just click on the link. It's probably going to take you to a landing page for my newsletter. It will capture your email. It will put you onto my newsletter list. If you don't want to be on the newsletter list, when I send an email out, which might be soon, it might not be for another month, just go down to the bottom and hit unsubscribe, okay? And then you will no longer be subscribed and you'll still have your free downloadable worksheet. I hope that you enjoyed part 2 of this series. We're going to be finishing up the 101 series here shortly with doing the binding on our beginner quilt. Flower Farm is coming up. I have some more ideas for some things to do for June. I hope you really enjoyed our Jelly Roll weekend project, Conversations with Conrad, which I love. If you're interested in more Conversations with Conrad, leave us a comment. And if you're interested in more Jelly Roll type projects, leave us a comment. And all of these things get considered. So I love the interaction with you guys. If you decide that you make the weekend project with Conrad that he suggested, then definitely send me pictures, because we love that. And I'd love to showcase it on the channel. So your quilt could appear on the channel if you send me a picture. And I hope you got some education out of me answering some of the emails. Definitely, if you get an opportunity and you're interested in this topic, definitely check out the podcast with the AI quilter and Elizabeth Chappell, which I'm going to link below. I think you'll get a lot of information out of it, and it'll educate you a little bit about how the model works, where it's getting its information, how it's learning, and also some of the controversies. She does touch on some of the controversies, especially when it comes to ChatGPT, which is one of our comments that I addressed earlier in the video. So until next time, check out the website, cabinquilters.com. If you love the video, hit a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you're one of the 90% of our viewers that has not subscribed to the channel. Leave us a comment. Also, don't forget, I have 6 quilt retreats here a year, Lake and Leisure quilt retreats. We're doing quilt therapy retreats next year, which I think you'll love, and some smaller projects. And I have a quilting cruise that is coming up in January of 2027. So if you're interested in doing the Panama Discovery Cruise, where we're going to go 13 days, different ports of call, I would love to have you join me and Moose from Moose and Squirrel. And speaking of Moose, you can check her out with me on YouTube at Moose and Squirrel Quilters. And we'd love to have you. We actually last month did a guest speaker, Beth Helfter from Eva Page Quilt Designs, and I think you'll love that. And that is our episode on traveling with quilts. So until next time, such a mouthful. Until next time, I hope you guys have a lovely time. Happy quilting.